Thank you for joining me on this Tuesday as we head into week 4. I am your host, Jesse Moeller, aka JMoeller05 of the Fantasy Lowdown. What we're talking about is we're talking about Dynasty, and in particular, Dynasty of the Dead. These players that, for whatever reason, have not lived up to expectations. So stay with us this week as we jump into those players, what to do and how to manage those players moving forward on your Dynasty rosters. And welcome in. I appreciate y'all joining me and taking the time out of your Tuesday to come join us and talk a little bit of Dynasty, because that's what us degenerates love. So we're talking about Dynasty of the Dead, surviving the zombie apocalypse in Dynasty. And what I mean by the zombie apocalypse is you having a few of these players on your roster that are literally just walking zombies that are doing nothing for you. They were valued at a particular point going into the year. Through 4 weeks, they have not lived up to that point. What do we do with those players in Dynasty? Obviously, if you're a contender, if you're rebuilding, you should have an idea by week 4. I know people say it's early in the season. You should know at this point in Dynasty if your team is rebuilding, if you're contending, which way you're leaning. You should have an idea based on your team. Even if it's vibes based and you're like, I like this team, I'm going to push it, go for it. Or on the flip side, you're like, I don't like this team. So you know what I'm saying? Like, we can get into the kind of minutia, the details of it, but I wanted to more focus on these individual players in Dynasty and talk about them. So let's jump into our first player, and that first player would be Mr. Bryce Young. According to Keep Trade Cut, he is the 32nd overall ranked quarterback, the 185th ranked player in Superflex leagues. Now, 185th ranked player, you think that is quite a fall, and yes, it is, because nothing was worse than what happened in week 3 when Bryce Young was on the bench, watching Andy Dalton absolutely carve up the Raiders defense, which showed us that, yeah, those first couple weeks of Bryce Young and the season before, like, Bryce Young is just not a capable NFL quarterback at this point in time. So what do we do with him? I kind of wanted to share some information with you so you guys see what I'm talking about. Here is quarterback efficiency. This is the EPA per play by quarterbacks. And if you see in the top left corner, Bryce Young, he was the worst quarterback in the NFL. I sorted it by quarterbacks who played 20 plays. So 20 plays with the ball in their hands. If you notice, Bryce Young is there. That is an absolute problem. He's below everyone. Now you're saying like, oh, Deshaun Watson's bad. Yes, Deshaun Watson's bad. Look at Skylar Thompson. He's middle of the range in there. Bryce Young is even worse. This is what I'm talking about. So if you're curious what this is actually measuring, the top corner is EPA per player, passes, rushes, penalties. The bottom right side is completion percentage above expectations. So Bryce Young is literally the worst in both of those categories. Now you're wondering where Andy Dalton is. Andy Dalton, middle section where I'm highlighting right here. He was really good in DPA per play, and his completion percentage above expectation was worse, but it was nowhere near as bad as Bryce Young. Just shows you the difference in what an NFL quality quarterback does, what non-NFL quality quarterback does in an offense where Deontay Johnson was alive in week 3 because he had Andy Dalton. With Bryce Young, he was going nowhere. He saw more targets in week 3 than he did the first 2 weeks combined, which shows you really the problem that Bryce Young was having is he just seemed like a broken quarterback. Now, what do we do with this player? Now, that is a very interesting question. There's a few things you can do, obviously. If you look at his rankings on Keep Trade Cut and how he is valued, I think it is very interesting. So I'm going to share where he is valued on Keep Trade Cut, just to give you kind of an overall example, not my personal rankings, but players he is going around that you can trade him for, which make it really interesting. So let's exit this and show you right here. Now, we have value overall adjacent players. So these are overall players that he's valued around that are not the same position. And then it's value adjacent quarterbacks. So quarterbacks he is valued similarly to. Now you're thinking, like, can I get these players for him? If you're on a contending team and you need points, I'm fine flipping Bryce Young for Andy Dalton. I had Bryce Young as one of my starting quarterbacks in the league, and I know that was an interesting decision. I dropped an absolute boatload of money in the Dynasty because Andy Dalton was a free agent, and I spent upwards of 70% of my fab on the season to get Andy Dalton because I needed a quarterback, and I feel like that's the best move I could have made. Instead of taking draft capital and trading, for like a Deshaun Watson, these guys, these Gardner Minshew's, these Daniel Jones were going to cost you more or less at least a second. I just use my fab to get him. Now, if you're in a win now contending team, go offer to Daniel Jones. Will Levis is a little bit more interesting. He's been really, really bad as well, so I don't really know if I want to go get Will Levis. He does have the theoretical upside, but Aaron Rodgers is right there on a contending team. So is Andy Dalton. And there's also Deshaun Watson, who I know it's been gross, but Deshaun Watson's top 15 quarterback playing for a game basis. Because why? Because him, Daniel Jones, they both run. It's not pretty, but if you're a contending team where you're just focused on this year, I'm fine making that move. Now, if you want to pivot off Bryce Young into a player, say you're more of a rebuilding team, yeah, go get a Demario Douglas, go do a Jermaine Burton, those type of deals, not a Hunter Henry. Someone where they have you theoretical upside attached to them where they can grow and develop, and you can kind of gain value with those guys. Because I get it with Bryce Young, people are going to be like, oh, yeah, he's going to be starting quarterback at some point. We don't know when that's going to happen. And if we don't know when that's going to happen, that's a problem because you're holding what we call this a zombie asset, a dead asset, right? Now, I know keep trade cut is very reactionary based market. Case in point, some of these guys are valued. But if you can move them into these younger players that have theoretical more upside attached to their name, like I think Jermaine Burton's a great one because he's not playing this year. But if you move a year down the road next year, like there's upside attached to that name. If you want someone who has upside this year, it's Demario Douglas because we saw the Patriots. They were just terrible. And what happened? They featured Demario Douglas because they didn't really have any other options. They couldn't do Ramondre in the running game. It was just a disaster. So they kind of shifted their focus. Now, the first 2 weeks, they were more in games where they were competitive. That was not really what they were focused on because they were in competitive games. So because it got so out of hand, they just said, you know what, screw it. Demario Douglas, like, let's roll. So you could do the Demario Douglas experience. I don't know how much upside is attached to his name, but the floor is much, much higher. Like he can be a somewhat valuable asset for you. So I don't mind going anywhere into that, like that range of player where it's a young player and there's upside. If you're talking about like a Jalen McMillan type stuff like that, guys who haven't popped off yet, they're rookies, they're young. A year down the road, they could be a lot more valuable. You could for sure do something like that if you want to. Now, I don't know if you want to. You might want to roll with Bryce Young, but I just don't think there's much upside. So I get it. Sometimes we have the sunk cost fallacy. It's like I paid a first for him, which is what I did last year for Bryce Young in one of my leagues, and I severely regret that. That was my fault, and I'm not going to live that down. But because of the situation and those things in nature, but no excuses for it. You have to make a move for the value now and not hold on to these players. You may have taken them in the 5th round, 4th round of freaking startups this year. Guess what? Like the market moves fast in Dynasty. It's much more like redraft. So if you can get out, fine doing that. We're going to move on to our next player because we got some fun ones here. I'm going basically from the worst player values to the highest ranked players. So the next guy we're going to talk about, and oh boy, it is a doozy. Let me tell you what. We're going to just start him in right here. So just give me 1 second as I switch that around. That would be Mr. Zamir White. I just don't know what to do with this guy at all. He was a pure fade for us, like an absolute fade. So if we look at Zamir White, he is currently the running back 46, the overall 177th ranked player in Dynasty, according to Keep Trade Cut. Now you're thinking like, oh yeah, Zamir White, it's just been a disaster. I don't think people understand how bad it's been for Zamir White. He's still going to be the starter. And I'm thinking this Raiders offense can't run. I don't care. He's not a receiving back. He has 5 receptions through 3 games so far this year, which is a third of what he had last year. But 4.9 fantasy points per game. Like he's not doing anything for you. The opportunity share was there, 60% opportunity share. He's top 30 in weighted opportunities. Like the options are there. Now you might be looking like, all right, well, what do I do with this guy? Because his expected fantasy points, it was viable. He was a back end RB3. It was 10.4. The difference is he's just been completely negative points for you because he can't do anything. His yards per touch is 51st among running backs. His yards created is outside the top 30. Yards created per touch outside of the top 30. Like it's just not great. In game script, they aren't allowed in negative game script, so this does hurt him because they have Alexander Madison, who's a better pass catcher. And it's really hard, which I always thought where he was going in the 6th round of redraft this year. Like, what were we thinking was Zamir White? What was the upside with Zamir White in that offense? Which is what my thought process was, and I was like, man, I think this is a really, really bad bet. So that's kind of my thought process going into it. I'm kind of going to give you what Keep Trade Cut has for him. We're going to go down a little bit. As you can see, his dynasty value has absolutely hit the skids. He was growing into the year about 3,200 points. He's down 800 points. That's a lot. As you see, the 6-month change, it's tanked. In positional value, he's dropped. He was basically RB30 going in there. He's basically RB47 now. You can do the Bryce Young thing into Zamir White. I don't think Zamir White does you really anything, so I don't want to trade him into a running back like that because this is the type of running back that just gets erased out of the league, and they might be like a backup or an RB3 on a roster, but they're never going to be a guy in attack anymore based on this. This was Zamir White's one chance to do it. Did not work out. NFL is a cruel land, man. He's the type of guy that needs anything. Now, you could do positional trades where you're like, you know what? Give me a Chuba Hubbard. You can get the points now. Fine doing that trade. Carson Steele, take the outside shot. Sure. If you want to do the Kareem Hunts, chase those backfields. You want to do the backup in Ray Davis, where if James Cook injury happens, he becomes significantly more valuable, right? Jaleel McLaughlin, you could do those guys. Now, you're noticing we're in the same range of players. So it's like Tyler Algier. It's a Demario Douglas. It's a Wan'Dale Robinson. I highly, highly doubt you can get a second. If you get a second round pick, I don't care what second it is. I would package a third with Zamir White to get 82nd. Like, that's where I would be at with him. So I'm significantly on him. He's just a guy I don't want on my roster. I'm not interested. He just has not been good at all. So for me, when I'm looking at it, is just like he's just a complete. We're just not doing this. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. Exit. There it is. Sorry about that, folks. I wanted to fix this a little bit. So yeah, Zamir White, just a guy like not really into. So if you can get out for anything, if you could take any second round pick, if you could package Zamir White, this is gonna be the easiest way to get rid of him. You package him onto a player, say like someone like Terry McLaurin, who's around, he's about valued around pick 100 in that range. Package him to upgrade at the position. Do that. Like you have to throw him into the package more than likely the deal. So the way you get Zamir White off your roster is you include him as part of a package where the team goes, you know what, I'll take Zamir, I'll take a shot at him. Where he's not the focal point of the Dynasty roster. That's how you do it with Zamir White because you want to get rid of him. The next player we're going to talk about is another running back where it's been a disaster. And it might be even worse. That would be Mr. DeAndre Swift, running back 40, overall player 140. Now we're moving up in value a little bit. That's 37 spots. That is significantly more value. I think with DeAndre Swift, you could talk yourself into the Chicago offense because it is a much better offense. They have Caleb Williams, all those fun things. But the problem is it's still DeAndre Swift. The biggest issue for DeAndre Swift has always been his vision. It has been his biggest malfunction in his basically build. If you were building a player from clay, you were kind of molding him. He gives you about 80% of what you're looking for from running back. He does a lot of good things, right? But the vision is such just terrible vision for him. And this was the issue of him in Detroit and in Philadelphia, where he was behind two really, really good offensive lines. You put him in Chicago behind one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. I thought it was going to be better this year. It is not. It has been really, really bad where DeAndre Swift has more yards after contact than total yards. Now, he's been really bad. And what I mean by that, his yards per carry have been abysmal. 1.8 yards per carry on 37 rushing attempts. 6.5 fantasy points per game. So he's somehow scoring more fantasy points than Zamir White. Not saying that's much, but if you look at the opportunity share and everything for DeAndre Swift, should be having a much better season. 76% opportunity share. Top 8 in the NFL. Weighted opportunities, he's 25th. Snap share, he's 14th. Targets, he's 17th with targets. He's not bad with targets. He's just massively underperforming his expected fantasy points per game. He should be a back-end RB2, like a high-end RB3. He's at an 11 expected fantasy points per game. The issue you can tell with the situation, even on 9% target share, offense has just been abysmal. So, that's been the biggest issue for him. And I don't know how it gets better. And we see that with these guys. And it does not go well. So we're kind of pivoting off to them looking at DeAndre Swift's value. Now, you see his value is $26.98. He is more expensive than Zamir White. He's dropped 1,000 points. He's dropped 24 points. People were higher on him because they liked the name cachet of DeAndre Swift. This was the type of player going into the year that you sell high. This is what I did with DeAndre Swift last year when he got traded to Philadelphia. And people were hyped for him. I traded him. I traded him for Aaron Jones in a first-round pick. I got out of DeAndre Swift on a really good package. That deal worked out immensely for me. You could do something like that when the market gets really high. Because as you can see right here, right before the season started, he's RB20, in that range. That's really good players. Now, if you want to look at overall value adjacent players, we're talking about Jalen Warren, Jerry Jeudy, mid-seconds, Javonte Williams, rolling forward. If you're giving me a mid-second, I'm cashing out saying good day. You take him. Now, interestingly enough, for value adjacent running backs, because he's in this group of a lot of running backs, and that's kind of the value range he's at, we're talking Zach Moss, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams, too. I don't want to touch Javonte Williams. I'm doing that. Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, Nick Chubb. I don't know really why you could take Nick Chubb, because if you're a quote-unquote rebuilding team, you could take Nick Chubb and you get 0 points until he comes back, right? So he's technically better than DeAndre Swift. I actually don't mind doing that because I think there's more upside to Nick Chubb in that Browns offense. I think Zach Moss is by far the most interesting of these running backs. Jalen Warren's a fun, he's splitting work with Najee, but he's injured. It's just the Pittsburgh offense is not really the best with Justin Fields. He's going to take away some of that work on top of it. So Javonte, it's just been a disaster with Javonte. I want out on Javonte too. Jerome Ford, you could do the Jerome Ford Nick Chubb thing as well too. Now it's interesting because we have a few trades of here. It's like Devin Singletary, those guys. I'm fine moving him into Devin Singletary. I don't really care. I just kind of want out from DeAndre Swift because how does it get better for DeAndre Swift? Now he did sign a 3-year deal. I get it. We could talk about his contract extension and all that fun stuff with DeAndre Swift, but man, this is just another guy who, much like Zamir White, he's gotten not one opportunity, he's got multiple opportunities. This is his third spot where he's basically been like, all right, you're gonna be starting running back. But the issue is DeAndre Swift has limitations. This is similar to when I talk about Trey Benson having limitations, guys like that, where their vision is kind of a problem for them. This is just, it really lets you down because if you're not reading holes correctly, you're missing holes, which DeAndre Swift does all the time, or he doesn't even see the holes. Creates problems in the running game. It creates this really up and down effect with the running game where you have good games, you have bad games, because you should see the opportunity, you should see the hole, you should take it. DeAndre Swift does not always do that because that is his Achilles heel, and he's never going to be one of the best backs in the NFL. We had him valued as top 5 running back at one point in time when he was coming out because people loved his profile, the passing profile. He was what we wanted. We wanted him to be Jahmyr Gibbs, and then we got the Jahmyr Gibbs, which is basically that player. So for DeAndre Swift, it's just been a slide the past few years. I don't think it's going to get much better. Now, you could talk yourself into there being some upside with him because there's Khalil Herbert, there's Roschon Johnson. They're both fine. They have limitations as well. Roschon's a more complete back. Khalil Herbert's just a good runner, like a good rusher. So if you give him the rushing attempts, which compared to DeAndre Swift, he's been better, like on his yards per carry and all these fun things. Yeah, because he's a better rusher than DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift more has limitations. He wasn't already doing the pass catching work as it is. He had some, but he wasn't playing third down role. That's where Roschon was coming in. So I think DeAndre Swift's just a good name to get out of based on this value. And we're talking 156. It's not terrible. It's not great, but it's like, if we're looking at trade calculators and we just want to look at these players in this range, can you trade him for a Jalen Polk? I think you can. Can you move him into an Aaron Rodgers if you're a contending team? Yeah, I think you can move from Jalen McMillan we talked about. Josh Downs is a really undervalued wide receiver who's really close in value to DeAndre Swift. Hell, you could do Ricky Pearsall. Deontay Johnson, it gets a little bit tougher just because he just popped off. Maybe you could do a Stafford if you're contending. There's a lot of guys in this range where you could do it on contending. You can go on rebuilding teams. You don't necessarily have to do it with the picks, but you can move off of these players. I think it's a good time to just get out from DeAndre Swift to a team that needs a running back and they have this backlog of wide receivers. Just go get one of their wide receivers. It does not matter which one it is. Anyone in this range of player, I'm fine. Like, send him straight for Josh Downs. Go do that deal immediately. You take that. There's going to be some bumps with Josh Downs, but we know he's a good NFL wide receiver. And the Pittman thing, or it's not the Pittman thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. The Anthony Richardson thing is very whoo, you have to just have some patience with that. I don't mind doing that on a rebuilding because DeAndre Swift is getting older. He's not young, so that's fine. Our fourth guy I want to talk about, who I was a sell for me going into last week, Travis Kelce, tight end 11, overall player 113. And you're probably thinking, man, like, what do we do with Kelce? And my thought process is just get the hell out. Like, get out while you can. And you're probably wondering, like, but yeah, Kelce still got it. He's just not the focal point. It's Rashee Rice's offense. Like, they're running everything with Rashee Rice. Now, I know Mahomes came out and saying, like, they're triple teaming Travis Kelce, and that can totally be true. But if you look at his target rate, his target share, it's 15th in tight ends at target rate. 23rd in tight ends, 14% target rate. He's 14% target share. He's 15th in tight end. His, air yard share is 17%. It's not great. His ADOT is 6.9. Like, there's just a lot of not good with Kelce. His yards per out run is 0.81. Like, this is just not the Travis Kelce we talked about. And he's 35. Like, he's 35 years old. He is not young. The thing is, he still carries that name cachet, unlike a few of these guys where it's worn off, where Bryce Young, Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, that name cachet is wearing off. It's still holding with Travis Kelce, which is why he's a borderline top 100 player in Dynasty. I think it's a lot easier to pit off Travis Kelce because what I did going into last week was I sold him straight up for David Njoku. I did that. I would happily do that again. David Njoku is going to absolutely go off in the Cleveland Browns offense because they are passing it at an absurdly high rate, and David Njoku at this point is great, just a better pass catcher. So I expect him to be better. I think with Travis Kelce, it's really easy to pivot off because he has the name cachet. So let's pull up some of these players on Keep Trade Cut to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about or moving off with these guys because it's really not too bad. Now, as you can see right here, Travis Kelce, he's cratered in value quite a bit. You can see the last 6 months, his value is absolutely tanked. I think it would have been a great idea to move off in this offseason. He's tight end 12. As you can tell here, he was tight end 8. He kind of lost a little bit of shine, but we're talking about good NFL players. Rashid Shaheed, a young, promising wide receiver. There's David Njoku. Derek Carr, if you need a quarterback, right? I don't really want to do the Derek Carr thing, but, that offense is going to be good. You can talk yourself into it. Stephon Diggs, James Conner, guys who are going to outproduce Travis Kelce at more valuable positions. Like, you could do the Terry McLaurin. He finally had a good game. Maybe someone with Terry McLaurin probably like, cool, I'll go get Kelce, because they don't expect McLaurin to do it. I would much rather have McLaurin, which is saying a lot from where I've went because I've never really been a McLaurin guy. But yeah, I would happily do that. For value adjacent tight ends, give me Ferguson. Give me Likely is the most ridiculous ranking of all time. Likely should not be in there. I don't really want to count Likely in this discussion. Give me Kittle. Give me Ferguson. I take Andrews, and even the disaster that is Andrews right now. Give me Njoku. Ingram, it's more of a discussion than Ingram, but I mean, you could talk yourself in Ingram. I'd be fine doing that because he's a little bit younger. But ideally, I would like to if you're rebuilding, go get a Benson plus, go get a young player, a valued around Travis Kelce at this price. 113. That's a good players. Like, we're talking about players that can be difference makers for you. Pick whichever player you want in this range. You want to do Justin Fields, you got to pay up probably because he's starting a quarterback, but they're close enough in value where it's still an opportunity where you can make that happen. Bucky Irving, sure, I'll take Irving. There's so many players. Trey Benson's a little bit more iffy, but the thing with Trey Benson is he's going to hold value. Similar to Ricky Pearsall in San Francisco, by not playing, he just holds his name cachet. This is interesting. If you look at Pearsall, his values basically stayed the same, where some of these players have absolutely tanked, where A.D. Mitchell, he's fallen off a cliff. You look at these young players, and these are value risers. Look at Bucky Irving, up 77 spots overall. Rashid Sheet up 65 spots overall. Derek Carr, because he's the quarterback. Quentin Johnston up 103 spots. These older guys cannot gain value like these younger players. Now, on the flip side, they can tank, but that's the whole ebb and flow of it. I'm fine doing this with Kelce. I don't mind doing that. The last player that I want to talk about is, we just talked about his buddy down in Indy, Josh Downs. It's Michael Pittman. The difference between Pittman is he's fallen off a cliff, and he just does not fit Anthony Richardson's skill set as all. You look at how far Richardson is shucking down the field. He's leading the league in average depth of target and his deep percent of passes downfield. That's what Richardson does, which is why Alec Pierce is doing okay. Pittman, he's getting a lot of looks. He's just not getting the targets. Now, if you don't believe me, look at his numbers. His target share seems like it's good, right? It's 29%, but it's only 20 targets, right? It's not good. His target rate, it all seems really good. The offense is just, they're not connecting. Now, you could say Pittman's a buy, and yeah, I actually don't mind buying Pittman at this cost, but overall, he's been a sell for me going in through this entire year, so I'm waiting for his value to get a little bit lower because he's inside the top 100 players. So for me, it's a good time to just get out on Pittman. I have serious worries about Pittman in general, and if he can be like the player was last year, which was all where we were fading him completely. We were talking about it with Pittman saying he's not worth the top like that price. Like he's tanked quite a bit. Obviously, his value is going to keep going down just because he's not giving you any points. Now, if you look at Pittman, he's 91st overall player. It's wide receiver 37. It's fine ranking. I don't mind it, but it's just the difference making of the players he's going against. Davante Adams, Keon Coleman, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Rashid Shaheed, Lab McConkey, all similarly valued wide receivers, right? You can make a case for all those wide receivers above. We have a George Kittle. We have a Joe Mixon if you're a contender. We have a Bo Nix if you want to do it at quarterback. I really don't want to do it at Bo Nix, but we have that at quarterback where you can pivot off of Pittman because Pittman's not young. That's the thing. Pittman's already 27 because he entered the league a little bit later. So people are thinking he's young. No, he's 27 years old. And this is kind of the thing that happens with the Terry McLaurins of the world when they do not produce. It's been a lot of not great production for Pittman. Last year, he was super volume dependent. The thing is with Anthony Richardson, they're just not running the RPOs the same way they were last year with Gardner Minshew. So it creates this problem for Pittman. He's still getting the first read looks and all that fun stuff. It's just not connecting for him. And I don't know how well it's going to connect for him for Pittman. I think he could be a fine, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range player for you. That's okay, but the upside seems extremely capped on Pittman, where at his price, I just kind of want to get out on Pittman. And if we're looking at keep trade cut right here, there's plenty of players like we talked about. And his dynasty value it doesn't seem great to me. And it seems like he's just a little overvalued. So if I'm going to do that, I'm just going to I'm going to take what we talk about tiering up with Pittman or tiering down. He seems like the perfect guy to do that with one or the two, right? Because you're telling me you can't move him into a good NFL running back like Derrick Henry, or we talk about Joe Mixon if you want those different making running backs on contending teams. Hell, Brian Robinson's a good one. We get up to Mike Evans. We get the TJ Hawkins of the world. The TJ Hawkinson seems like a really good buy because he's basically out of sight, out of mind. He is coming back, though, at some point this year. I would much rather get the tight end. Now I talked about moving off tight ends. They're not important. Why I like Njoku, why I like Hawkinson. There's two that truly difference-making tight end potentials for you. So these are kind of 5 of the guys I was looking at where I was like, you know what? These guys stand out to me for a particular reason where we talk about Dynasty of the Dead, where these are zombie players on your roster where they have tanked in value. And the whole flip side of it is that I don't see them being able to significantly gain value. How high can Pittman's value go from overall top 100 player? Can he get to the top 50 players? I don't think so. It's weird, but he feels very capped in kind of the player he is. he's fine. He could be useful for you, but like if you're kind of more or less at your peak, which I kind of view him as, I could say maybe get top 70 if he starts hitting, but it's gonna be really hard for him to get higher in rankings because he's older. He's not really explosive. He just lives off of volume. And this is kind of like what we talk about with these running backs that are just the volume dependent running backs, similar to Ramondre Stevenson, right? Like when you lose the volume, it doesn't hit right, then the problems start flowing. So these were 5 guys that stood out to me in this week on this edition of the Fantasy Lowdown. I hope you guys take this information, use it wisely to kind of like find ways to, even at a depressed price, get off of these players because it's not going to get better for these players. It's more than likely going to get worse dynasty-wise, where they might go out of sight, out of mind like Bryce Young, but the upside's just not there anymore, right? Like we're seeing Justin Fields be a starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's still not valued that high because people are terrified about the lack of contract and committal because Bryce Young is going to be moving on to a new team. He's not going to be locked into a contract. So what does that mean? He has to prove it once again, similar to Baker Mayfield. And if they do prove it, similar to Baker Mayfield, where they get that contract locked in, then yeah, you could buy in. But there's just no floor with those type of guys because when they get replaced, the team as a whole need like healthy weight with them. They're like, you know what, we're just gonna bench you because you know what, we have no cachet to hold you. So that's kind of my whole thought process with these guys. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining me on this week, going into week 4 of the Fantasy Lowdown. Dynasty of the Dead, surviving the zombie apocalypse in Dynasty. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I want to thank you all for joining us. And yeah, if you haven't forgotten to, please like, comment, subscribe, share this all you can. Like I was saying before, all your guys' work is, all your support is really appreciated. We're at basically like 10% of subscribers of all the people that view our work, or about 10%, which means we have 90% of people that view our work that are not subscribers. We're looking very much to make that number go up and join the ranks, like get more subscribers on our channel. Build up to 500. We're at 440. We're getting really close. We're creeping onto it. The more you guys support us, the more we're happy to put out more content and give you guys more of the good stuff. So for myself, for Aaron St. Dennis, for Jeremy Schulman, for S.C. Romero, this is Jesse Moeller signing out. And yeah, I will see you all next week, this time for Fantasy Lowdown.